58 years behind the chair. Thank you for finding my channel, and thank you for listening. The whole purpose of this series of vlogs is to talk about my career over 58 years. I started hairdressing in 1968, and I want to talk about the developments that have happened in our industry, how things have changed, the things I've learned along the way, the mistakes I've made, the things that worked, the things that didn't work so well, and what is happening in our industry today. What are our challenges, and what can we potentially do about those challenges? And what's the future of our industry looking like? And how's that going to be affected by what is happening in society right now? The last video, which was chapter 3, I finished up talking about, I was going to talk about the next, what I saw as the next big development in hairdressing. And I left off talking about the fact that at that point I was working for manufacturers and doing a lot of education work in salons, and at the same time working in salons myself. Then a big change in my life happened when I decided I didn't want to stay in the city I was born. I was born in Peterborough, and I wanted to move on and really experience different aspects of the industry. I'd enjoyed being a stylist, and I still enjoyed that, but I wanted to do other things. I was interested in the technical side of it, and so I actually applied for a job with Goldwell back then as one of their technical team. And I got interviewed by a guy called Jutzenbeck, who was their German technical director, and he flew over from Germany to meet me and interview me. It was a very interesting interview, and I consequently got offered the job of being a technical director for the Kent area. And I very much look forward to doing that and moving away from where I'd started and doing something different to stimulate my passion for the technicalities of hairdressing. But then something unexpected happened. The guy that I was working for at the time decided he wanted to sell his business. And I found myself owning a hairdressing salon. Not something I wanted at all. I enjoyed being a hairdresser, and I was of the mistaken view that I could be an employee one day, and an employer the next, and it would be fine. Everybody would, still treat me the same as one of the team. And wow, was that shock. That was not the case. Suddenly it was a case that I was on the other side of the fence, and I wasn't prepared for that at all. And I found it really difficult to sort of navigate that. And so I kind of looked around at how best to do that. And I then employed a lady that I knew at the time, a hairdresser, a very good hairdresser, and she came to work for me as a manager. On the day she started, they all discovered in the salon I was in hospital with a fractured skull, because the night before somebody had knocked me off my bike and put me in hospital. So that took me out of action for a few months. And the salon was in kind of disarray because I wasn't there. They'd got this new manageress, and I don't think they were very kind to her. And she said that to me afterwards. Anyway, we got through all of that. And then I proceeded then from then on to sort of try and manage a business. And I had no business skills at all. I'd never learnt any. And, all I'd learnt is what I'd learnt from my mentors. And it was largely hairdressing based. And I remember my old boss in the salon where I worked and I trained. He had this big old draper's cabinet that separated the reception from the salon, and with great big drawers in, glass fronted cabinet. And the mail arrived, and he used to open one of the big drawers and throw it in. And then once a month his brother, who was the accountant, would come take the drawer away full of all this mail that was unopened. And it really was a haphazard way to manage. He was a great guy, but he really didn't have good business sense in that regard. And that's how I learned to run a salon. Not a good example. So anyway, how was I going to manage this? And I groped about in the dark, like so many salon owners do, and pretended to be a salon owner like I thought salon owners were, and acted in a way that I thought was the right way to act. But really, spinning plates and groping about in the dark. And then all of a sudden I saw a whole article and series of adverts for an organisation that had sprung up in hairdressing called 365 Day Hairdressing. Never heard of it. And it claimed to offer training for salon owners who were really great hairdressers perhaps, but maybe really didn't understand their business as much as they would like to. And it was a business club for salon owners. And the idea was that you joined. It was quite an expensive thing to join. But for that joining fee, you then received several 2 or 3 day seminars a year that covered everything you needed to know in hairdressing. And that was started by 2 guys, a guy called Leslie Spears and a guy called Stephen Way. Now, neither of them are now with us anymore, sadly, but they were 2 really groundbreaking guys. Stephen Way was a hairdresser. He had a salon in Bond Street, and he trained with Vidal Sassoon back in the 60s. He retired eventually from salon and sold his salon. And most famously for being the husband of Gloria Honeyford. And Stephen passed away fairly recently. Great guy, wonderful human being. And he was the hairdressing arm of the organisation, 365 Day Hairdressing. And he was the one that was presenting new ways of approaching clients, consultation, and all of those structures around hairdressing itself. Now, Leslie Spears was a different animal altogether. Leslie had come from a marketing and business background. He'd worked for General Motors in America, he worked for Hertz Rent-A-Car in Italy, and various other organisations. And he'd come back from working with these big organisations and marketing and learning, cutting his teeth on that. And he came back to the UK and he got snapped up by an organisation at that time, a group of salons called Andre Bernard's. They don't exist now. But at the time they had salons all over the country. And they brought Leslie in to sort of reintroduce the idea of hairdressing being more business-led and not quite so creative and arty. They wanted to make sure that the businesses were successful financially. And so Leslie cut his teeth in the industry. And what he found he was shocked at, he found hairdressers were not inspired enough, that they weren't providing a service for the clients that the clients really should be getting. The way that products were introduced into salons was poorly led. There were so many things that he found didn't work very well. And having finished working for Andre Bernard's, he then set up business with a guy called Hugh Dawson in Newcastle upon Tyne. And they had a salon called Lupin's. Now, a lot of people in this area where I live now would remember Lupin's. And they were groundbreaking because it was used as an experimental base for all new things in hairdressing. One of the things at that time, there's very few people did retail sales to customers, home care sales. And Lupin's had a huge hair care shop at the front of their salon, largely Red Ken, which Red Ken was a very revolutionary new product at the time. And they tried all sorts of different techniques. They had things like standby appointments, which was based on the airline industry. That if you wanted a last minute seat on an aircraft, and you didn't mind where you sat and so on, then you'd get a good deal. And he introduced that idea into hairdressing. Standby appointments, setting appointments on the day, as long as you didn't mind who did your hair, you didn't specify a stylist, then you would get an appointment at a reduced price. And there were many other techniques that were tried out in Lupin's that then became the mainstay of what 365 Day Hairdressing was teaching. Now, it was a bold move because in those days, hairdressers didn't really want people telling them how to run their businesses, and they still don't. They're still very adverse to that idea because they know what they're doing. And I tell you, I didn't. So I joined 365 Day Hairdressing as one of the members. And one of the first things that happened, and this was one of the first things that happened when you could go on an introductory day, and you were asked questions like, what's your average bill? Do you know what percentage of your clients are new clients? What percentage of your customers are return customers? questions that hairdressers couldn't answer. They didn't know their figures. All they knew was at the end of the year, the accountant gave them a set of books and said, this is how much money you've made over the year and this is how much tax you're going to pay. By that time, the money that they said had been made was spent anyway, so they didn't really understand balance sheets and things like that, you know. They understood pounds in the till. So we were suddenly exposed to doing profit and loss accounting, doing cash flow forecasting. And then on the other side, we were taught about marketing, how to market your business, how to talk to your clients. They had a whole consultation system called the 5-step recipe. And in those days, it was almost done with a clip chart, asking questions and gaining information from the customer, done in a completely different way, to the way that it became, which was the hairdresser standing behind the chair with their hands on the client's shoulders, talking to them through a mirror. And it was like, no, that's completely the wrong way to do that. And I'll talk about some of that stuff later on.